Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. This week we are looking at half of a verse, Exodus 6, verse 3b. Last week we looked at the first half of the verse. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai. And we talked about the possible meanings of the name El Shaddai, or the title or descriptor El Shaddai. This week, I want to focus on the next half of the verse. Before I dive into my own translation, I want to read to you from the NIV, which matches the ESV in this verse. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. That's what it reads in the NIV. Now, you probably know this already, but just for anybody who might not have realized this before, whenever you see that the word Lord in your Bible and it's in all capital letters, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, or in other languages like in Spanish, it would be Señor in all caps, that is standing in for the Hebrew name of God, the personal name of God, Yahweh. And so when I read from my translation, that's why I'm saying Yahweh, because that's what the Hebrew says. And our English translations signal that by using all capital letters. And so in the NIV, this verse is saying, I revealed myself to your ancestors as El Shaddai, but they didn't know me by my name, Yahweh. And that raises a number of questions and problems, because if you've read Genesis, you've seen lots of Lord in all caps in Genesis. The narrator uses the name Yahweh quite often. And in fact, Yahweh introduces himself by name on several occasions. So this seems to be at odds with what we see in Genesis. So there's three possible solutions to this problem, and I'm going to kind of work through them and then give you my translation. This is a tentative translation. I don't feel like I'm 100% convinced of it, but I think it's a worthy possibility, and so I'd be really curious to hear what you think of it. So one possibility is to understand this as the ancestors did not know the name Yahweh, but the narrator inserted it anachronistically back into Genesis in order to indicate that the same God who appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God Yahweh who revealed himself to Moses at Mount Sinai and to the rest of the nation. So it's the same God. Genesis kind of gives us his name early, but here in Exodus we find out that they didn't actually know his name back in Genesis. I think the problem that I have with this view is that Genesis 15:7 and Genesis 28:13 both quote Yahweh as introducing himself by name. And so then then it's not just the narrator is using God's name anachronistically, but the reported divine speech is even anachronistic. And that feels a little problematic to me. Also in Genesis 4:26, it says people began calling on the name of Yahweh. So again, that feels like it's a problem if we understand it as they didn't know the name at all. A second solution is to see that the ancestors knew the name Yahweh, but they didn't understand the full significance of who Yahweh was or what his character was like. And so the book of Exodus is introducing us to the character of Yahweh, a greater knowledge of who he is. And I think this view has some merit. Jeremiah 16:21 and Isaiah 52:6 both talk about knowing Yahweh's name as like shorthand for knowing his power. So that's using it in a similar way. So in that sense, here, God would not be saying to Moses, they didn't know my name at all, but they didn't really know me. They didn't know what my name meant. They didn't know what it meant for me to be Yahweh. And so that's this is filling it out. And again, I think this view has merit. What troubles me about it is that it seems to downplay the continuity between the ancestors and their experience of God and the Exodus generation. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob actually hear God speak to them audibly. God makes significant promises and shows himself to be faithful in all sorts of circumstances. So I feel like it might be a bit too disparaging towards the narratives of Israel's ancestors to suggest that, well, they just didn't really know God, and now God is known in Exodus. So that's why I have a little bit of trouble with that. There's an alternate view that's been put forth by Desmond Alexander, and I'm going to read you my translation now, which adopts his view, and then explain why I think it works. So in my translation, I'm saying, I render it as, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai. My name is Yahweh. Did I not make myself known to them? So this translation presumes that they really did know the name Yahweh, and that's the whole point, that God has been known as Yahweh for a very long time. And so now we've erased the discontinuity or the contradiction between Genesis and Exodus. So this fits with Genesis. It fits with Exodus 3:13 and 14, where it seems like Moses needs to use Yahweh's name. He needs to know Yahweh's name when he goes back to Egypt and use it like as a calling card to say, hey, Yahweh's the one who commissioned me. And if he doesn't know that name, then they won't recognize his authority. That doesn't work very well if they don't know the name Yahweh. He could have just made anything up. So I think this fits better with Exodus 3. And I think it grammatically works better as well, because the verb yada, to know, is here in the nifal. And when a nifal verb is used, it's often causative or reflexive. I made myself known. Then you wouldn't have also an object. I made myself known. I made Yahweh known. So it would have this awkward, I made myself, my name Yahweh known, which it feels grammatically awkward. The other grammatical reason why I think this translation is better, or is worth considering, is that the word lo, which means know, usually starts a sentence, and here it appears halfway through, and so it seems like it might be starting a new clause. So my name is Yahweh. Did I not make myself known? So the not kicks off that question and is separate from the statement, my name is Yahweh. So this proposed translation by Alexander reconciles this passage with Exodus 3. It reconciles it with Genesis. One thing I haven't mentioned is that there's a huge discussion about the potential literary sources behind the book of Exodus, and that's how it's often explained. That, well, one source already knew the name Yahweh before this, but the other source didn't. And here they've been combined, and there's this sort of messy overlap where now they knew the name, but they didn't know the name. And so that's why it feels like a contradiction. And I don't have trouble with the idea that there were different sources. My trouble would be with the idea that the redactor or the person who compiled them would have been so incompetent that they would have just left these apparent contradictions sitting in plain sight. So I feel like that doesn't speak very highly of the literary genius of the redactor. So you can tell me what you think in the comments below. I would love to know if you think, especially those of you watching who are Old Testament scholars, Hebrew Bible scholars, I'd be curious to know if you think that this translation of verse 3b is plausible. Again, I got it from Desmond Alexander, and I think it's worth considering. So let's have a conversation about it. And in the meantime, have a great week.